If you're just getting started reading piano music, you are probably starting from the very beginning and trying to read your way through, right? If you're doing it this way, you are probably dealing with a lot of frustration as you are starting and stopping a lot, as you're naming each individual note, pausing when you're trying to remember where you were on the piano, and ultimately just getting really frustrated by how long it takes you to get through a single line of music. Well, you can set yourself up for more success if you can start a habit of pausing and looking at your music before you play it and analyzing what it's asking of you before you actually try it. There are 3 key things that I encourage my students to look for when they are analyzing their music, and that is the location of steps, skips, and repeated notes. Let's look at these together. A step on your staff is when you move from a line note to the very next space note, or from a space note to the very next line note. A step on your staff means that you're going to be moving to a note right beside each other on the piano. It's really helpful for us to recognize steps because it means that when we see this on a staff, we can just move to our very next finger. We don't even need to name the note to know that we're there. A skip on the staff is when you move from a line note to the very next line note, or from a space note to the very next space note. A skip on the piano means that you are going to start with whatever finger, skip a finger, and then move to the finger after that. We are skipping a note, and that's why we call this a skip. Now again, this is really helpful because it means that you don't necessarily have to know the note name in order to know you're playing this accurately. You can simply skip up a finger and know that you've landed on the right one. The last kind of movement that I like to point out is the repeat. Now, a repeat is when you are starting on a line note and going to the exact same line note, or if you were starting on a space note and going to the exact same space. That is a repeated note, and typically these are the easiest to play because you don't move your hands anywhere. But I also want to point to you another kind of repeated relationship that most people don't think about, and that is when you move away from a note and then return to that first note that you were playing. Even though this is a larger jump and you might need to take some time to name this note, you don't need to rename this note if you can remember it was the same one that you played before. So this is another kind of repeat relationship. And when I point this out to students, that often helps them speed up their sight reading skills. So those are the 3 key relationships that I encourage my students to look for when they are looking at a new piece of music. And generally I find that having them stop and look at the music before they start to play really helps them establish the parameters of the song and lets them know what to expect before they sit down to play. And knowing the parameters of what is coming up often helps lessen their anxiety and boost their confidence and eagerness to learn. So now that we have looked at each of these 3 relationships on the board, why don't we take a minute to look at some sheet music together and see if we can find these relationships in a real piece of music. Okay, I've got my music here at my desk. Let's look through it together for relationships of steps, skips, and repeats. So I am using a very popular classical piece, Musette in D major, which is usually attributed to Johann Sebastian Bach. It's a very popular piece, but it is classical music. I thought I would use classical music for our example today because classical music is so often seen as being inaccessible for beginners, but I really want to try to show how using these relationships of steps, skips, and repeats can be so helpful when we are trying to read any kind of music and can actually make classical music more accessible to beginners. So let's try this out. Now, just to kind of review, if I were a beginner piano player and I were going all the way through here, I would get really overwhelmed by how many notes there were to play. They're all over the piano seemingly. And I would try to name every single note. It would take me a really long time to get through this line. But let's just take a minute to look for steps, skips, and repeats and see if that doesn't make reading this line of music any easier for us. So let's just kind of go through here and let's just start noticing what we notice. Do we see any steps, skips, or repeats? Well, yes. I see that this note up here, even if I don't know what note it is, I can see that it's a line note, and I can see that this is a space note right underneath that line. So these two are a step apart. So that means that if I know this note, I can find this note pretty easily. But it gets even better. This is also a step from that note, this is a step from that note, and this is a step from that note. So in fact, all of these notes are just a step apart from each other. That's really great information. So then that means that all I need to do is know how to name this note, and I can find these other notes really easily. Okay, let's look at the left hand. Any steps, skips, or repeats? Well, kind of. There is obviously a lot of space between these notes, but I'm noticing that these are repeated and these are repeated. So really, if I can just name this note and this note, I'm good for the rest of the measure, right? So now that we know that, why don't we keep going to measure 2? Do we see any steps, skips, or repeats? Yes, we do. You may notice that this is the exact same copy as this measure over here, but not everyone notices that at the very beginning. So let's just, again, take it right from the basics. Do we notice any steps, skips, or repeats? Yes, I notice that this line note, still don't know what it is, but I can see that this is just a step down from that note. And then we have a step, step, and step. So again, we have, once we know what this note is, we can actually play all 2 of these measures very easily without needing to name any other notes. What about down here? Look at that. Exactly the same. We've got repeated notes. We've got these repeated notes over and over again, all the way to the end of the measure. So that tells me that if I can learn this note, and this note, I can actually play all the way to the end of this measure very easily. And that's really helpful because it's motivating and encouraging. We've gone from needing to name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 notes to 3. That just makes it so much more accessible. Let's keep going. All right. Okay, so we do have quite a big jump here, right? So we're going to have to name this note. What about these? Or do we have steps, skips, or repeats? These are all steps. Step, step, changing direction, step, step, and then another step, right? What about our left hand? We may want to name this note, but you know what I also notice is that this note is just a skip up from this note. So if I know where this note is, this actually isn't too hard to find. And then what? Step, 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 step. Okay, so now we've gone from naming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes to get us to this point. What about here? These are steps from each other. We might want to name this note, these notes here. But then after that, we've just got skip and skip, skip and skip. So let's just take a minute to think about how much simpler this line of music got. Now, instead of seeing all these notes as being really confusing, we've actually connected them into some kind of a relationship. And that makes this so much more accessible for people who are early on in their piano journeys. So now you need to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the 7 most important notes that you need to learn how to name. And the rest of these you can figure out just by relationships. I think that sounds absolutely fantastic. And the other thing I want to mention is that this system of noticing steps and skips can help you if you are early on in your piano journey and you're just learning music for the very first time. It can also help you if you are an experienced piano player and you just really don't enjoy reading music. Chances are you don't enjoy reading music because you don't see the relationship between the notes. And this can really, really help. It certainly has helped me in my own piano journey. So there you have it. Let me know what you think. Does this help you? Do you feel like you could learn how to play a line of music like this? Do you feel like learning how to play a line of music like this would be any easier now that you can see steps, skips, and repeats? I'd love to hear what you think. Take care.